Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it a few seconds/minutes whilst everyone joins the meeting and gets settled. It looks like we've got a really healthy number of people joining, so I'm really excited that there's so much interest in this report. I'll just introduce myself whilst getting ready to get started. I'm Chris Nichols. I'm Head of Conservation Outcomes and Evidence at the Woodland Trust. And I was really excited to be asked to sort of compare or host this webinar on behalf of Action Oak. I've been involved in Action Oak for around 5 years, I think, and I'm definitely a kind of self-confessed oak enthusiast, especially ancient ones. So I'm really happy to be here. I've got a bit of experience with state of reports with the state of UK woods and trees from 2021 and 2025 coming out of my team at the Woodland Trust. So yeah, we're hopefully in good hands to talk about the state of UK oaks, which is what we're here to talk about. And welcome, Nicola. It's good to have you on the panel. So let's get started in earnest then. Now we have all of our panelists. First of all, it's worth saying that we're very grateful to Robert Bartlett and Bartlett Tree Experts for supporting the launch of this report. So a big thank you there. And of course, thank you to DEFRA for funding the development of the report. So yeah, it's a big team effort, and Action Oak's a big initiative of different organisations, which you can find out on the Action Oak website. But there's a really nice, diverse range of organisations contributing because so many people care about oak trees. So a few little housekeeping bits before we get started. Then the webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available afterwards on the Action Oak website. In terms of the format, we're going to have a few short talks from our panelists covering the different things like the importance of UK oaks, the threats they face, a bit about what condition they're in, and then some thoughts on evidence gaps and current research. And we'll follow that with a Q&A session. So please do use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen throughout the talks, and we'll put your questions to the panel. I think there's a upvote function as well, where you'll be able to vote for the questions you most want me to put to the panel. So do use that to help me choose the most relevant questions, the most important ones. Depending on the volume of questions, we're due to finish anywhere between 3 p.m. and 3:30. So yeah, please don't hold back. So who have we got on the panel? We've got a fantastic panel of oak enthusiasts as well joining me today. We've got Nicola Spence, who is chair of Action Oak's Research and Monitoring Subcommittee. Nicola is the UK Chief Plant Health Officer and is the head of the National Plant Protection Organisation. Give us a wave, Nicola. Okay, and we've got Kate Halstead, who is a climate change scientist at Forest Research and did her PhD on oaks, funded by Action Oak. Hello, Kate. Very good. And we've got Tony Kirkham, who is chair of Action Oak's Knowledge into Action subcommittee, but Tony's probably best known for being the head of the Arboretum Gardens and Horticultural Services at Kew. So very pleased to have Tony with us. Hello, Tony. And we've got Lisa Brooks Smith, who is co-chair of Action Oak, and Lisa's the chief operating officer of Forest Services in the Forestry Commission. So an illustrious bunch to be talking about this report, the state of UK's oaks. Really excited to get into some of the detail. I suppose without further ado, we want to have most time for questions at the end, so we don't want to listen to me waffling on. We want to get on with hearing about the report. So I'm gonna hand over to Lisa first, I think. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Chris. And I've just got a few slides that I want to share, so I'm just going to attempt to do that now. So can you all see that? Yeah, give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, so let's just put it in the mode. All right, so thanks for the introduction, Chris. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes up front talking to you about the importance of our oak trees in the UK and some of the findings from the report. So the first thing to highlight is that there are actually over 600 different species of oak. So Quercus species, that's the Latin name. But here in the UK, we've got two natives, and that's Quercus petraea, the sessile oak, and Quercus robur, more commonly known as the English or common oak or peduncular oak. Quite difficult to tell apart. And one of the ways which you can sometimes distinguish them is to look at the length of the stalks on the acorns. So the sessile oak has shorter or stalkless acorns, and the English or common oak has longer stalks. Both of those species quite widespread across the UK. Tony's going to tell you a bit more about their distribution and some of their distinct patterns across the UK. But also I wanted to highlight that we've actually got 3 non-natives that are commonly planted here in the UK as well. That's the home oak, Quercus ilex. You'll often see that in urban planting scapes. It's quite an important species for the horticultural trade as it's evergreen. So people like that for foliage during the winter. The Turkey oak is quite common now in the wild environment and quite widespread. And red oak is also often planted for its timber properties as well. So look out for all of our oaks when you're out and about. And just on the right-hand side of the screen, I've pulled out some of the data in terms of the numbers of oaks we have in the UK and the hectares of oak woodland as well. So really important species for us. Also, one of the most striking facts coming out of the report is the fact that the UK has Europe's greatest population of ancient oaks. So an ancient tree is the one that's in its final third phase of its lifespan. It's got characteristics like a large girth, might have a hollowed out trunk, for example. They sort of occupy really important ecological niches in the landscape and support quite rare biodiversity in often cases. So our ancient oaks here in the UK, because we've got more than any other European country combined, are actually globally important in terms of their conservation. They're not just biological relics, they are actually supporting centuries-old habitats and ecosystems. And it's because they've been around for so long that they're also so valuable to us in social and cultural terms as well. They've been important to us from the Neolithic period, so going back to 4000 BC or thereabouts. When the early farmers started to arise in Britain, they started clearing trees to make land for crops, using the timber to make permanent housing. And then later on, they were really important for our navy and shipbuilding, fuel and furniture making. And there's a fabulous example here on the right-hand side of the screen of the hammer beam roof in Westminster Great Hall. It was commissioned by King Richard II in the 1300s. It's still going strong. It's the finest example of a hammer beam roof in Northern Europe. So if you ever get the opportunity to go and see it, please do. So we can really see oaks echoed throughout our culture as symbols of strength and durability. Lots of references in our languages, mighty oaks from little acorns grow. You know, they're the cathedrals of our landscape, if you like. They're really prominent trees in our parklands and our deer parks. So they got a really high social and cultural value, but it's often difficult to quantify. But what we have managed to quantify is the fact that economically our oaks are contributing 0.7 billion, so not million, billion pounds per year in value to us here in the UK. And that's through things like environmental services, like climate regulation and carbon storage, improvements to the quality of our water and our air, benefits from recreation and mental health and well-being, and then also directly through things like timber. So we know that in the UK, 50% of the hardwood consumption we have is oak, but we actually only grow less than 15% of those here in the UK. So there's a real opportunity here for oak hardwood going forward. Because it's a dense wood and a dense timber, they're phenomenal stores and sinks of carbon. So we know that our oak trees hold up to 15% of the carbon stock in our woodlands in Britain. That's 31 million tonnes. And environmentally, we've already touched on how important they are, but the report is telling us the findings from the Oak Ecology Database, which was compiled by a research project called Purpose, Protecting Oak Ecosystems. And that's telling us that there are over 2,300 species that are dependent on our oak trees, different types of fungi, invertebrates, lichens, birds and mammals. And over 300 of those are solely dependent on our oaks for survival. Many of those are rare or specialist species. And what this is telling us is that if our oak trees go into decline, that isn't a single species issue. The impact of that is going to cascade through entire ecosystems on our landscape. So just to recap, the take home I want you to take away from my section is that our oak trees are amongst the most iconic and important trees in our landscape, both in ecological terms, social terms, and also economic terms as well. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Lisa. That's fascinating. And let's proceed with our next speaker, which is, I believe, a double act between Nicola and Kate.
Lisa, thanks very much for introducing why oaks are so important and so diverse. Kate and I are going to talk about threats to oak. I'll hand over to Kate in a minute because she's going to talk about the kind of non-biological threats. But I think it's important to say that oak trees are affected by a very wide range of pressures, everything from mammalian browsing to complex declines, as well as weather events and pests and diseases. So it's important that we kind of understand all of that. So I'll ask Kate to kick us off with talking about her work on extreme weather events, I think. Kate, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicola. I really want to start by saying that climate change is already affecting how oak trees respond to their environment. So we're not seeing this happening in a few decades' time. It's happening right now, and that's obviously why we need to take action, which this report has highlighted. And due to climate change, we're obviously seeing much milder winters and earlier springs in the UK, which in turn affects oak phenology. So this is the timing of the flowering of a tree or plant. And a key finding of the new report was that we're now starting to see that oak trees are flushing new leaves up to 2 weeks earlier than the start of the century. So while this may seem like a small shift, it actually signals much deeper changes in our climate and shows that oak is indeed responding. And early flushing can have very detrimental impacts to a tree's overall health. So like I said, although we're experiencing earlier springs, with climate change comes these extreme swings in the weather. So we could have an early spring followed by an extreme cold event or frost. And young oak leaves are very, very sensitive to frost. And so if exposed, any of the new growth will be damaged. So the tree then has to produce a second flush of leaves, which costs the tree energy and reduces overall vigor. But I think the real danger really comes from when we have multiple threats occurring at the same time. So oak as a species is actually relatively resilient to climate change, but that doesn't always protect individual trees. We're now seeing that these multiple stresses are combining, which is what we call compound risk, which can really overwhelm an individual. So for example, we're now seeing an increase in extreme weather events such as drought, storm events, which are becoming more frequent and intense due to climate change, and also occurring in regions which were previously unaffected, where the tree might not have developed enough resilience to, say, for example, a wind during R1 coming from a non-prevailing direction. So when these events weaken or damage a tree, that often then acts as a point of entry for pests and diseases because the resilience has decreased. So, for example, with acute oak decline, which affects nearly 400 sites across the UK, researchers have found that drought predisposes oak to the decline. And obviously that's a real concern because once the tree is affected, the oak will go into decline and be killed within 3 to 6 years. And this can also be seen with compound risks with storm events. So, for example, during Storm Arwen back in November 2021, we carried out research which found that oak trees that had pre-existing health conditions, such as oak powdery mildew, fungal pathogens, extreme crown defoliation, and structural defects, were actually more likely to be damaged during the storm event. So there really is that linkage there between diseased and trees of poor health being more at risk during extreme weather events, then becoming damaged, and then that acting as sort of an incursion point for further pests and diseases. So it really demonstrates the compound risk and how it can soon sort of spiral into this feedback loop, which would unfortunately lead to decline. So I shall hand back over to Nicola. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the pest and disease risks and mammalian risks. And just to point out, the UK Plant Health Risk Register, which assesses all sorts of global threats to our plants and trees, has over 1,400 plant pests and pathogens, and over 30% of those do represent direct threat to our trees, including our oak. So several of the pathogens are already established in the UK, and Kate mentioned acute oak decline, but we also have the oak processionary moth, which is an invasive defoliator of our oak trees, which also has public health risks. It's established, unfortunately, in London and parts of the southeast, and it's one of the most frequently reported oak pests in the UK. We've been trying to protect against OPM for more than a decade, particularly trying to slow the spread. And we invest £1.5 million annually trying to keep the trade and particularly the movement of trees restricted so that we're not spreading the pest even further. And then Kate mentioned acute oak decline. There are actually several oak declines. They are complex syndromes, a mixture of bacteria, but also we have a native beetle, an agrillus beetle, which is associated with acute oak decline. And the acute oak decline is much faster acting than another chronic oak decline, which also occurs. And the fact that it is this complex between pathogens and insect vectors makes it very, very difficult to manage. But we're working hard with practitioners to look at, not only how might we manage the oak processionary moth in the future using biological control, but also how can oak trees be better managed to give them more resilience. And then there are several other risks of concern, like the oak wilt fungal pathogen and oak lace bug, which are not present in the UK, which are a really high priority for us to keep out through a combination of surveillance, monitoring, and also regulation. These are quarantine pathogens, so we can take action to keep them out of the UK. Just moving quickly on to mammalian threats, obviously we know how important these can be, particularly when trees are trying to establish. And this year, DEFRA have published a deer impacts policy, setting out a 10-year plan to manage deer pressures on woodlands, while also recognising their ecological benefits. And we also published a grey squirrel policy, which is a coordinated 5-year plan to limit the significant damage that they cause to trees. So you can have a look at those. They're available on the internet if you want to Google those. And then finally, through the Action Oak Partnership, we funded a lot of really important scientific work on oak health through initiatives such as the Bacterial Plant Diseases Programme, and also our Future Proofing Plant Health Programme that is run out of DEFRA. So I think that's all I've got time for, and I'm now going to hand over to Tony. And are you there, Tony? Yes, go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nicola, Lisa, and Kate for 3 interesting pieces of work. I'm going to talk about the extent and diversity of oak, and Lisa's mentioned that in one of her slides that there are between 500 and 600 different species of oak worldwide. And if we look at Plants of the World Online at Kew, which many taxonomists use today, there are 473 accepted species. It's a Northern Hemisphere genus, and the hotspot, believe it or not, is Mexico, where there are 160 different species growing. However, we heard from Lisa that we have 2 native oaks that are quite distinct but closely related. Quercus petraea, the sessile oak, and Quercus robur, the pedunculate English or common oak. And incidentally, robur is Latin for hard, strength, and power, which I think the oak clearly demonstrates. The interesting thing is that mature oak trees growing in the United Kingdom today are descendants of trees that recolonized the British Isles from southwestern Europe after the last ice age, about 9,500 years ago. And the best evidence suggests that oaks spread up from the south of England, and DNA from 98% of oak trees sampled from ancient woodlands had markers that showed these trees are descendants of trees that recolonized Britain from the Iberian Peninsula. Interestingly, though, there are a small number of trees in East Anglia which have a different ancestral origin. It's not known how these trees arrived to Britain, whether it is through natural process or human intervention, but these trees can be traced back to Italian or Balkan ancestry. The two native oak species occupy slightly different, but in some cases overlapping ecological niches. And Lisa explained how to tell the two apart with the long and short stalks on the two species of acorn. The peduncular dominates the south, east, and lowlands of central England, and it grows on heavy soils rich in clay particles that are more alkaline. And it prefers wetter sites and is tolerant of waterlogged conditions. It also shows a high capacity for germination on disturbed soils and has a greater light tolerance than Quercus petraea. The sessile oak, Quercus petraea, is generally found in more northern and western parts of the UK and is characteristic of siliceous soils. It's more drought tolerant than Quercus robur and can tolerate deeper shade. And succession is seen between the two species, with Quercus petraea replacing Quercus robur in some instances. Despite the different ecological niches, their ranges do overlap considerably, and surveys find both species throughout the UK. Both the Botanical Survey of Britain and Ireland, BSBI, and the National Biodiversity Network, NBN, produce maps of distribution. And although they differ slightly, both demonstrate that both oak species are distributed widely across the UK, except in the very north of Scotland and the Grampians. Many of us are familiar with oak woodland, which is estimated to account for 7 to 8% of total woodland in the UK. Based on analysis of data from the 2007 countryside survey, oak woodland accounts for about 190,000 hectares of England, 17,000 hectares in Scotland, and 39,500 hectares in Wales. However, many of Britain's oak trees actually grow outside of woodland areas, with an estimated 2.3 million oaks outside of woodland in rural areas in Britain, out of an estimated 123 million trees. This includes trees in hedges, individual trees, and trees in linear features such as alongside streams. And oak has been found to be the most common individual tree found outside of woodlands, with oak trees making among the most numerous in urban environments. Studies suggest that oaks make up 7.3% or 613,000 of the 8.4 million trees found growing throughout London. But oak trees are rarely planted as street trees as they're not suitable. However, they're widely found in parks and along highways. Our two native oaks have an ability to hybridize with each other, forming intermediates, but still maintain distinct species populations. And it's thought that the hybrids, Quercus rosacea, may help facilitate Quercus petraea moving into a new area after the better pioneer species, Quercus robur, has colonized it. There's a current study at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, where they're sequencing the DNA from 2,000 British oak trees to get a fuller picture of the effects of hybridization in oak across the UK, as well as looking at how oaks adapt to the different environments. The genetic diversity within populations of oak species in the UK is high, which means that each individual tree may be quite different genetically from a neighbouring tree. However, oak woods in Britain generally have a long history of deliberate management and planting, which influences the genetic diversity. So using good seed stock from genetically diverse but known provenance seed stands will produce better performing trees when planted in the right place. Previous trials have mainly focused on yield traits for adaptation for both climate change and disease resilience, which are now arguably very important. There's a wide age distribution of oak trees in the UK, but a lack of smaller size suggests an issue with regeneration. The countryside survey data shows the size of oak trees in open ground areas were mostly 75 centimetres to a metre stem diameter, closely followed by, we've heard about ancient oaks, and the UK has more ancient oaks recorded than any other European country. Quercus robur and Petraea are also common across Europe, but the landscape history and management of trees in the UK has enabled many oaks to survive for centuries, and in some cases more than 1,000 years. Many ancient trees exist due to the creation of royal forests, ironically deer parks and chases in England, and these parklands contain a disproportionate number of ancient trees. Particularly high numbers of ancient oaks can be found in Western England along the border with Wales, with fewer in the north, reflecting in part the natural distribution of oak. Oak trees dominate the list of ancient trees in the UK. So finally, what is the role and importance of ecological connectivity? The UK is one of the most densely populated countries in Europe and has one of the least wooded landscapes in Europe. But human activities have led to a reduction in native woodlands through both destruction and fragmentation, and much of the remaining woodland is mostly not in favourable ecological condition. Oak woods and trees, including ancient and veteran trees, which are often found in wood pasture and parklands, form discrete habitat patches within a mixed landscape that can be hostile to associated biodiversity. In general terms, connectivity promotes resilience, allowing species populations to recolonize patches, rescue declining populations, change or increase in their range, and allows genetic mixing of populations, which is particularly important given the large number of obligate and highly associated species that depend on the oak tree that Lisa talked about at the beginning. Thank you, and back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Tony. Kate, are we heading back to you now?
Just very briefly, just to touch upon, obviously what Tony mentioned with how we really need to be preserving our ancient species. Obviously, oak is under pressure from multiple threats. The evidence is there in the report. So at that level, there's little that we can sort of do to stop climate change entirely. However, you know, many of the pressures that Tony listed there are human driven. So, for example, lack of oak protection, poor regeneration, unchecked deer grazing. And because these are human driven, that means that there are solutions and many pressures which we can actually reduce. So in terms of adaptation planning, site management is really important. So having a good understanding of your site, what are the soil conditions? Is there any existing compaction? And you can also use decision support tools such as ESC, so the ecological site classification, to assess site suitability, and forest scales to assess the current wind risk to your site. So really considering the current and future climate projections. And there's also lots of material on Forest Research's Climate Change Hub on planting guidance. In terms of obviously older, ancient veterans, it's really important, like Tony mentioned, to be active in surveillance. So monitoring your oak. to help the early detection of pests and diseases. And there are many resources where you can actually report outbreaks, such as Observatory and the Tree Alert platform. Thank you. I'll head back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Kate. I'm really glad you mentioned Observatory there. I was thinking throughout all of the talks here about ways that people can get involved with all the different interesting things we're hearing about from oak trees. And yeah, Observatory is one of those citizen science projects that is a really good collaboration between the Woodland Trust and Forest Research and other partners that gives us that early warning detection for some of these pests and diseases that we're talking about. So yeah, really important to mention. I'll hand over to Lisa now.
Thanks, Chris. So I think I'm now going to talk to you about some of the research we've got going on in the UK and some of the evidence gaps that we've got and that we want to fill going forward. So I've got a few slides again, which I'll just share. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that we have got a phenomenally broad and fast-growing interdisciplinary program of research happening about oak health. And this is really the result of 10 years of investment in this area and numerous research consortiums coming together to help us research and tackle some of these challenges. And I can just see from the attendee list, we're now over 400, and I can see lots of the researchers on the line. So I'm hoping that I'm going to do you justice here. So please don't tell me if I don't. But there's loads of work going on. There we've got ecological surveys happening and long-term monitoring studies. There's climate impact work happening. Phenomenal amount of genetic research looking at the oak population. We're looking at physiological responses of trees to different types of stresses, investing in improved disease diagnostics, and also looking at social and behavioural response. So what are the barriers for implementing some of these solutions on the ground? And the whole of this research is really underpinned by the Action Oak community. It's a partnership between those founding partners that are on the steering group and the wider UK research organisations. So the partnership is spanning government, industry, charities and academia, all coming together to help us tackle these problems. And there's a great set of resources on the Action Oak website if you want to find out more about what's happening in the research space. Go and have a look at the annual research reports that are published each year because they are a wealth of information. So the new one, 25-26, won't be far off, but at the moment, the 24-25 report is up there and previous years as well. So one of the key areas of focus is really around the long-term monitoring of the health of our nation's oak trees. And we got some long-term data sets that are mentioned in the report. There's the National Forestry Inventory that does the ecological conditions survey. There's the Forest Conditions Survey that Forest Research carry out that looks at 5 indicator tree species. Oak is one of those, and you can see some of the outputs of that on the slide on the right-hand side. And what it's generally telling us is that there's lots of regional and site level differences. At a site level, we might see some oaks deteriorating. In other sites, we might see improvements to crown condition, etc. So it's not a simple picture. There's lots of regional variation. There's also lots of investment going on in getting better at this surveillance and using new tools and technologies like remote sensing and LiDAR techniques. So at the moment, we're quite good at mapping the treescape at a UK level and knowing where the trees are, but we really need to work on getting better at mapping that down to species level more accurately and enabling us to spot when things are going wrong. So can the sort of canopies start telling us which individual trees are looking stressed so that we can go in there and find out more. And there's also lots of work happening around harnessing the power of our citizen scientists and citizen surveyors out there. So there's a new initiative coming on stream soon, and there's a webinar this time next week on the 24th of March looking at the My Forest Lab app, which has been developed by Forest Research and the Silver Foundation and the University of Aberystwyth. And that's allowing land managers to input the different signs and symptoms they're seeing on their oak trees in the field, and it will help them monitor and predict the health of their trees over time. So if you're interested in that side of things, go to this webinar next week and find out more. Also, Chris just mentioned Observatory. That's one of our flagship citizen science initiatives. It feeds directly into Tree Alert, which is the government system. And we've got hundreds of volunteers out there in the field capturing data on the health of our trees, including oaks, and feeding that directly back into the system and the government surveillance programme as well. We've heard a lot today from Nicola and Kate about threats to oaks, so it doesn't come as any surprise that a lot of our research is focused in that area as well. We're looking at individual pests and pathogens that might threaten our oaks. And one of the things we're really interested in is nature-based solutions. So rather than having to fell our trees, which is a rather, radical solution, or treat them with nasty chemicals in the wider environment, how can we harness the nature of the power of nature itself through things like natural enemies and parasites that might help us tackle oak's processionary moth, an invasive species, for example. Kate's talked about extreme weather events and climate change and the impact of that on our oaks. We're looking at things like wind risk and the structural response to future climate change scenarios. So there's some fabulous work going on at Birmingham in the FACE facility around that. And I can see we've got people from Birmingham on the call today. So hello to you guys and well done. And the take-home messages from all of this is that it isn't a single issue. It isn't a single threat. Climate is compounding pest and disease pressures. So it's about the interaction of multiple stresses. And that's known as something called the spiral of decline. And I can see we've got Sandra Denman as well on the line, who's recently authored a new paper about these decline spirals. So go and have a look at that and see how all of these threats are coming together and potentially tipping some trees over the edge and into this spiral of decline. And what this is telling us is that from our research, we need integrated solutions. We need to look at this at a holistic level. And there's some great work going on around things like disease suppression. So how can we sort of use the soil microbiota to make our oak trees more healthy? Things like Yakult for trees. And also, how can we prime our trees to make them more resilient to different pressures? So there's some great work again going on at Birmingham about using sort of chemical stressors, but then priming seedlings to be more resistant to drought, for example, in a nursery setting. So having a look at those sorts of things is really fundamental. And then there's a whole body of work now, really innovative stuff, pushing back the research frontier around genetics of oak, the diversity we need to see, and understanding how that feeds into future reproduction and resilience. Some great work going on at Kew, looking at the characterization of our oak populations across the UK, and Tony was referring to some of that work in what he was talking about. And also looking at the genetic susceptibility of oaks to different diseases like acute oak decline, or conversely, their resilience to disease pressures as well. And great work going on at the Future Trees Trust as well, investing in long-term seed orchards for oak and also future breeding programs for improved trees. They're involved in work looking at masting dynamics. So why do we sometimes get these really bumpy years of acorn crops, and then in other years there's barely anything? And those dynamics are really important for the sort of future supply of acorns and trees going forward. Really important work for our nursery sector, for example. So these tools in this space are really helping us be able to select more resilient individuals going forward, and also to understand why some of the trees are failing in the field as well. So the take-home message is, if you're planting oaks out there, if you're a land manager, really think about where you're sourcing your seed from. Obviously, make sure you're safe sourcing your seed from biosecure suppliers. Think about your provenance choice, and also what types of genetics do you want in your trees for your land objectives, if you're growing timber or if you're more interested in the environmental and biodiversity side of things. So within this report and other reports in recent years, there are various evidence gaps in the sort of themes of research that we're looking at. So we need to continue to monitor our oak populations and do even more in that space. We need improved statistical data on their demographics and their condition. We need to understand why our young oak trees are not establishing in some scenarios. Is that about deer? Is it about soil? Is it about climate? Are they being outcompeted? Is it all of those factors? We need to understand what the sort of impact is of these interaction between these different stressors that we've got. And we also need to think about, if we are going to lose some of our oak trees and our oak trees are going to become more fragmented in the landscape, what impact might that have on the movement of other species, biodiversity that relies on our oaks, for example, or even about genetic flow within our oak landscape? Could we see genetic bottlenecks going forward? And if so, how do we overcome that and compensate for it? So we mentioned genetics and how incredibly important that is. Loads of promising research in that space, but it's new and it's incomplete, and there's much more we can do about that. And then finally, social research and behavioural insights is really important. Understanding what are the barriers to people implementing some of these solutions in the field, and how land managers are responding to some of these pressures that they're facing. So in future, what are the important next steps that Action Oak is going to take? Well, first of all, coming out hopefully soon will be a research roadmap, setting out some of these gaps and our priorities for addressing them. We're going to continue publishing these annual research reports, summarising the research that's going on, so go and have a look. We'd love your help in continuing to raise awareness of the importance of our oaks, the threats they're under, and to help us raise funding to address some of these research needs. And we will continue to work with our policymakers, our land managers, really turning this knowledge coming out from this report and other work that Action Oak does into action on the ground. So this is a bit of a call to action to come and support us. Go and visit the Action Oak website and find out how you can get involved. Thank you, Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your insights and some of the details from the State of UK Oaks report. It's been amazing. We've got lots of questions coming in. It's fantastic to see that people can actively support Action Oak, whether they're donating. We've already talked about Observatory as a citizen science project people can get involved in. But we've mentioned a few other issues like phenological events, so the timing of different aspects of oak, which is that Kate mentioned in terms of oaks, leaves coming out 2 weeks earlier than previously, the advance of spring. And if you want to get involved in more of that kind of citizen science, then check out Nature's Calendar, which is a really good citizen science project on the timing of events around spring, lots of different species. And we've also really spoken a lot about ancient trees and how important the UK is for the numbers of ancient trees in an international context. And we're only recording the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more ancient trees out there, and ancient and veteran trees, that we can record. So please do check out the ancient tree inventory as well, just to support recording of more ancient trees to help us protect them. And we've got please do keep putting your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll put as many of them as we can to our panel. Speaking of the kind of the timing of events, there's one question here, Kate, that I'd just like to put to you, which is just a bit of point of clarification. I think that when we say that oak are sprouting new leaves up to 2 weeks earlier than at the start of the century, we're talking about the year 2000 or the year 1900 when we say the start of the century.
So we're talking about the year 2000, which is
that's
quite a shift within 26-year period. If you think about it,
that's really shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, in such a short amount of time.
And yeah, spring advancing, we can see it all around us. I've already got robins nesting in the bird box, and so it feels like it comes earlier every year, and we've got the evidence to show that. So let's move on to some other questions then. There's one here that I think is a really important one about management of trees that are suffering. So thanks, David. There's a kind of a bit of detail there, but I think the key question is around in terms of acute oak decline. About there being a kind of source of detailed management advice for how best to handle affected oaks. And the key question here is whether we leave symptomatic trees or remove them immediately, for instance. Well, I'd say initially, David, we acute oak decline is obviously really serious, and we're doing lots of fantastic research into it. But trees can recover, so let's hold some hope here. We talked about the spiral of decline, and let's not get too bogged down in a spiral of decline in terms of hope for our oaks. So yeah, definitely, I would not advocate for felling immediately for fear of acute oak decline. But it's fantastic all the research that's going into that. Does anyone else have a source of good management advice for oak that I'd like to mention?
Chris, oh, sorry. Carry on, Lisa.
Go on, Tony. No, you go first.
No, I was just going to say it's a lot of keeping. It's about keeping trees healthy and fit and resilient to these diseases by keeping them stress free. And what we've got to remember is trees are like people. We're all different. You know, I talked about all the diversity of oaks across the UK. You know, some are tougher than others, but actually, you know, we do a lot of decompaction work, mulching work around old trees now, just to rejuvenate them and give them some vigor so that they can often fight with some of the threats and issues that are being thrown at them. So, yeah, not to give up hope, but to give them a chance. Sorry, Lisa.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to highlight that colleagues at Forest Research have produced some guidance on managing trees with acute oak decline. So please do go to their website because there's a wealth of information on there to help support you.
Fantastic. Yeah, some great resources there. So let's go to another question here. So there's a question around hybridization of oaks. We've talked about all the diversity of oak species. I was really interested in the kind of heritage of our oak trees as well. It's fantastic. Is hybridization feasible between our native oaks and non-native oaks that we mentioned?
I think that's
Shall I talk about that, Chris?
Go for it, yeah.
There's very little chance actually, unless it's forced in the wild. And what we've got to remember is that, you know, the oak genus is a huge. There are a huge number, and if we look at the taxonomy of oaks, they're broken down into sections and subsections and subgenus, and usually they would need to be in the same section to hybridize. So I did see that question on the questions about is it likely that something like the red oak can hybridize with our two native oaks? And the answer is no, because they're in two different sections. And in North America, I think there's only one species, Quercus alba, that is in the same section as Quercus robur and Quercus petrea. So, and that doesn't like our climate. That needs really hot summers. Maybe a tree for the future, but at present, it's a tree that struggles in our climate. However, probably the most promiscuous species in the genus of oak is the turkey oak, Quercus cerris, and that will freely hybridize with other trees in the same section, and several hybrids like the Luckham oak is a hybrid with Quercus cerris in it. So I think in the wild, it's highly unlikely that we're going to get North American oaks hybridizing with our native oak.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, fascinating, all the genetics and the sort of promiscuity, as you said. So there's another really important question here, which should be good to put to someone on the panel, because we've talked a lot about kind of ancient trees. We've got a question here from Nick about what role could or should ancient oaks be playing in contributing to the next generation of UK's trees and woods. So sort of something about that kind of the age gap that we're seeing between the oaks that are around today and the ancient oaks and the need for that continuity of habitat. Does anyone have any thoughts on how the report or the knowledge of oaks, I suppose, in general, kind of how we can actively help promote that, the ancients of tomorrow, I suppose?
What I would say, Chris, is that the ancient oaks have been around a long time and have seen a lot of changes in climate and various threats, and they continue to be strong and dominant trees in the landscape. So I would suggest that they are potentially some of the trees of the future because they have the ability to adapt um, and produce the next generation going forward. And listen to Kate. That in 26 years we've seen a 2 week change in leaf burst, and I've seen that since I've been monitoring OPM, because the caterpillars of OPM actually feed on the closed buds of the oak as they start to swell, because there's no tannins in those leaves, and that first instar are so small that the slightest bit of tannin would kill them. So whether that's the oak trying to defend itself from OPM, or the OPM is very clever, and that will hatch as with bud bursts. That if that initiates the hatching of the eggs. But I would still suggest that some of the ancient oaks will have a role to play with our future woodlands and tree establishment. Mm.
Absolutely. So, Lisa, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few words to support that, because I think they have potentially quite an important genetic contribution to make as well. I know there's some research we would love to be able to do looking at the genetics of our ancient oaks. They've been around for a long time, but is that by chance or is that by genetic design, if you like? They could be the keepers of some really rare resilient genetic traits. We just don't know. That's some research we'd love to be able to do. We know obviously that they occupy an important ecological niche, because of their age and their structural properties, for example. So they're incredibly important going forward from that perspective. But we also need to make sure that the oaks that are growing today in their middle phase become the ancients and the veterans of tomorrow. So, it's incredibly important that we have that age diversity of oaks in our landscape, and that was one of the key findings that came out of the report too. So we do need to focus on oaks at all stages in their lifespan.
Absolutely. You'll be excited to hear, Lisa, that a research project's just started looking at the genetics of ancient oaks. So there'll be more to there's some Woodland Trust colleagues involved in Arb Association, and I'm sure that will be coming to an Action Oak research report near you at some point. So we'll talk more about that in due course. Really interesting stuff. Kate, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just again to sort of reiterate that, although as a species, oak is very, very resilient. I know that we have, obviously, it's shown that there are several threats, but I think in this report, it was highlighted that crown condition in oak over the past 5 or 6 years, so I think between 2019 and 2024, has actually begun to stabilize after a decline in the late 1990s. So again, perhaps we are seeing that oak is adapting to climate change and the changes in the environment. And I think, like Tony said, I think it's really important to look at these ancient trees that have been within this landscape for hundreds, if over 1,000 years, as they are relatively resilient.
And we've mentioned about how mammalian pests can influence the resilience of oak trees in particular, but also all of our woodlands ultimately. I've forgotten who mentioned the mammalian pests in our speakers today, but it'd be interesting to dwell a bit on just the details of how that impacts the resilience, because it's something definitely not to underestimate. We sometimes get a lot of focus on the bacterial side and the beta side, but let's just take a moment for the mammals. I think who wants to sort of mention something about deer and squirrels?
Yeah, I mentioned those in my sort of brief intro. I think it's really important that DEFRA has now published forward plans, because we know that deer populations are increasing dramatically We know that grey squirrels are really having a serious impact as well on tree establishment. So it is time to commit to further research, for example, for grey squirrels, including work on immunocontraception, expanding training and guidance, wider access to grants for control, so that we can actually tackle this as a nation. And then on deer as well. In fact, I was listening to Farming Today this morning as I drove to the station, and they had a feature on venison processing and just explaining, how that's working in Scotland. But they do have this very sort of, there's a lack of kind of continuous supply chain, obviously, because it's seasonal. But you can begin to see that actually managing deer populations and that actually having be able to create some value out of the product, could actually drive a better, more coherent management strategy. So I think there's a lot to be done, but it's good to see a kind of plan setting that out. Did you want to come in, Lisa?
Yeah, it was really just to sort of highlight what you were saying, that, in January and February this year, DEFRA's published its grey squirrel policy statement, its deer impact statement. Go and have a look at those. There's loads of action going on in this space now. Nicola mentioned the grants. If you are battling with grey squirrels and deer and the impacts of those on your land, you can apply for grants and supplements now to help you combat that. So I think you get £60 per hectare on top of your woodland improvement grant to help you manage grey squirrels, £105 per hectare to help you manage deer impacts. And as the Forestry Commission, we've recruited a lot of deer officers recently. There will be local deer officers to you that you can go to for advice. They're working with landowners at a landscape scale now to tackle deer at a landscape level, and there's plenty of support and guidance out there. So do come and talk to us if you've got grey squirrel and deer problems, and we can help support you in that.
Fantastic. And I think the venison market's going to be really important in the future. And if you see, I don't know if you call them early adopters, but it's an NHS trust serving venison, for instance. And I was at the O2 in London, London recently. They were serving venison burgers at the concert. So yeah, it's encouraging to see it in everyday places and not just in kind of forestry circles. It's out there in the public. It's great.
And we've got the British quality wild venison standard as well now, which is helping suppliers get this into the supply chain. So yeah, loads of work.
And some people might be thinking, so how do deer really impact our oak trees? And of course, there's a big link here between deer and the genetics that we're talking about around oaks, because if we can't let our oaks regenerate and kind of track climate change with the kind of allowing survival of the fittest to happen in the woods, and the problem is that the deer are eating all of the saplings, so preventing those new generation of trees. So they are, all of these problems are interlinked. But we've talked about mammals, so can we talk a bit about insects? There was a question here around the oak processionary moth, which was, does the panel predict that present measures will manage to control oak processionary moth? Any comment on kind of the fate of that for our oaks?
Well, we're never going to be able to eradicate it. That's clear. Unfortunately, it is established, but we do have some candidate parasitoids that represent a kind of potential future management option. Obviously, we have nest removal, and we are looking at a combination of sort of nature-based solutions, like using sex pheromones to disrupt mating behavior, to selectively reduce population sizes, enhancing natural predators, parasitoids as a kind of suppression strategy, and also looking at the genetic diversity of OPM populations. So I think there are several things that we can do and we can invest in, particularly research. But unfortunately, it's one that we won't be able to eradicate. So again, learning a lot of lessons from how that was introduced, making sure that we respond very, very quickly. We did have one incursion of pine processionary moth. I think it was about 3 years ago, on imported trees from France. We dealt with that very rapidly. Trees were destroyed because of the risk of pupae in the soil, and we've never seen it again. So, that is the strategy for future threats. But unfortunately, OPM is something that we've got to learn to live with. We do still have a large area of the UK that has no OPM, and our policy is to try and keep that free. So we do take action on oak where we find it in our pest-free area still, but a combination of strategies there.
Thanks, Nicola. And I think whilst we're talking about bugs, there's another question around kind of likely routes of entry into the UK for the oak lacewing bug and for oak wilt as well. And I suppose it's interesting because we're talking there about kind of the spread of oak processionary moth within the UK and trying to control that, but also then the entry routes into the UK of things that we haven't yet aren't yet
Yeah.
established and we hope don't get established. So I don't know if you could say a bit about
Both of those. Oak wilt's a pathogen, but it is vectored by the oak bark beetle, and oak lace bug is a sap-sucking insect. So in terms of the pathways of entry for both of those, it would be a combination of plants for planting, oak trees, but also non-squared wood. So, for those reasons, oak is regulated, and also we regulate timber so that we can, manage them. I mean, one challenge around oak lacebug in particular is it's very well established in Europe. So whether or not we're going to see any hitchhiking, that's something to look out for. We did find the plain lacebug, which is in the same genus. We found that in London a couple of years ago, and it was simply hitchhiking. We found it in parks. It was spotted first through iNaturalist on somebody's backpack on a bus near Hyde Park. So it's also been spotted on plane trees at King's Cross railway station and the Gare du Nord. So, Eurostar is a very obvious potential pathway there, either on the train or on people. So, unfortunately, there are hitchhiking pathways that are very difficult to manage. But certainly, regulating, inspecting, being vigilant, being observant are ways to keep oak wilt and oak lacebug out. Thanks.
Chris, we should also add that we should be buying oaks from reputable nurseries and supporting Plant Healthy UK. And that will help to minimise the impact of or the possibility of bringing anything into the UK. And prevention, as you said earlier, is better than cure.
That's a really good point. And yeah, the importance of biosecurity and Plant Healthy and the UK and Ireland Source and Growing Programme are all really important parts of this puzzle for sure. Yeah, it's almost kind of it boggles the mind really to think about where the plain lace bug on the bus on the way to Hyde Park, where was it going? It's just kind of it's interesting to think, isn't it? So you've really piqued people's interest, I think, in terms of this the origins of oaks from the Iberian Peninsula, but also from Italy or from the Balkans, I think you said. So people are interested in whereabouts in East Anglia these oaks of mysterious origin are, or is it not quite as sort of specific as a website?
Yeah, I don't think the report goes into that much detail, but what I did notice on one of our attendees, Frederic Maker, is doing a PhD on the oaks in East Anglia. So that's that potentially there's some information there, and that he'd actually picked that up, that some of the oaks that he was looking at were from from the Balkan Peninsula and Italy, etc. So yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Mm,
Shows how diverse the research population is. The
yeah.
research
I'm at
in
Kew
terms of
Gardens today, visiting with our Biosecurity Minister, Baroness Hayman, and earlier we went and had a tour of the oak collection at Kew. So Tony, you probably planted a lot of those, but we were hearing about introduction of, new oaks from places like the Caucasus, which it's predicted, the climate in the kind of Kew area will be very similar to the Caucasus as it is now in the next 50 or so years. So looking at other species of oak that might do better under future climates, and then looking at, seed sources and genetic sources so that we've got resilient trees for the future.
And certainly Mexico. Further, a lot of the oaks in Mexico are probably quite tender at present and not fully hardy. But I'm sure as the climate changes, we'll be able to go deeper into Mexico. And I know that some of the Mexican oaks that I planted 30 odd years ago are doing really well now and making big trees. So, yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, and it's really important to think about what the criteria are of what we kind of consider good trees into the future. So yeah, really interesting research into that. So the few other questions then. We're gonna go for another 5 minutes. I know we're past three o'clock, but we've had some really good questions coming in, so we wouldn't like them to go unanswered. And if we do find, or we're looking through the chat, we've got a significant kind of chunk of unanswered questions, then we've talked about potentially a kind of FAQ document to sort of go alongside this on the ActionAid website, but that's a bit TBC, but just to sort of whet your appetite there. And just to sort of definitely encourage you to go and check out the report and the summary of the report on the ActionAid website. Just another reminder to definitely go and do that. And I sort of see it as a not just something to pick up and look at once, but come back to it as a reference document for evidence around oaks. And depending on your line of work or in your personal life, weave it into your conversations, weave it into your work, and sort of try and use it as much as possible, because these reports can be so valuable for influencing hearts and minds, and sort of seeing real change, and sort of generating new evidence and filling those evidence gaps. So yeah, let's go to a question around powdery mildew. Don't know if anyone is a powdery mildew expert here, but we'll soon see. That apparently we're seeing a lot more powdery mildew and frost damaged leaves and buds on young trees. Would this have long-term impact as growth rates are affected? So what's the question? Sorry. Would this have a long-term impact as growth rates in affected areas are significantly low? Will they recover? Is it going to be a long-term thing? Do we know? We can always put it to one of the experts in the future.
I think we need an absolute expert on that. But I mean, obviously, powdery mildews are quite a challenge when it comes to sort of seedlings and saplings. They can be very affected by it. It's a really difficult problem in the nursery sector. There's lots of work at Birmingham looking at this as well, and some research looking at how we can defence prime saplings, and some quite interesting work looking at, if you take acorns from a stressed parent tree, then the seedlings that develop will also inherit some of that defense priming as well, to make them more resilient in the future. So things like powdery mildews, which are quite widespread, you could see, if we've got acorns regenerating under parent trees that are under that pressure, could potentially be inheriting some of that defense priming and resilience going forwards as well. So it's a really interesting area. So, if people are interested, go and find out more about it.
Hey, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just to add to that, the research that we did looking into the effects of Storm Arwen on oak health, we found that oak powdery mildew was again sort of a precursor to a tree being more likely to be damaged during a storm. So again, these were much older trees. I know that obviously Lisa was just talking about saplings, but I think I think, yeah, that obviously is some kind of scope for it to have negative impact on the tree, and then in combination with different compound risks. So perhaps solutions like halo clearance to allow sort of more light to get to the tree to limit the spread of oak powdery mildew. As we found that oak trees that were sort of in open grown parkland were actually a lot more resilient because they didn't have this issue.
Thanks, Kate. We've hit 3 by my computer. Does anyone want any kind of final thoughts from the panel before we wrap up? I'm not going to go panelist to panelist. I don't want to put you on the spot, but please feel free to pipe in with some final thoughts before we sign off.
Chris, I just want to say what a great report it is, and there's no bias there as I chair one of the subcommittees of Action Oak. But it's a really good read. It's a really easy, straightforward read with a wealth of information and references. And I would recommend anyone at any level to download a copy and have a good read of it.
Fantastic. Nicola?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a massive thank you, particularly to the research community. Working on oak health is not easy. We really appreciate your commitment. And, we are here to support you because we know we need you for the long haul. So thank you very much for that. And also to all the practitioners that are taking the science and evidence and turning it into advice for landowners. I think we've got a brilliant Action Oak community, and we'd love more people to join and be part of protecting our oaks for the future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nicola. And Lisa, did you want a final word?
Yeah, just again echoing thanks. Thanks to DEFRA for funding the research report. Thank you to Elizabeth and team that were the authors of the original report behind it, and to the Action Oak initiative for steering it and producing the glossy reports out of that work. It's really, the 2 reports on the Action Oak website are fabulous. And it's sort of a bit of a call to action, I guess, to the community out there. Plant more oaks because we need more oaks for the future. Actively manage the oaks you've already got. Protect them from pests and diseases, deer and squirrel browsing. And help us invest in research for the future for some of the solutions to the challenges that they're facing. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And we'll give the last word to Kate.
Just a massive thanks, obviously, to everybody. And I think key, final thoughts is obviously picking up on what Lisa has just said, that I think management is really, really key. I think having a good understanding of your site, using some of the resources that we have available on our many different platforms.
Fantastic. Yeah, management is very important. That's a great final point to make. So it just remains for me to thank our panelists. Thanks so much it's been a really good discussion and good presentations, and had some really positive feedback in the questions and chat. So thank you very much to you. Thanks to Royal Forestry Society for hosting Action Oak, and to Annabelle there. You might be able to see her name as the director of Action Oak. So she deserves a big round of applause for all of her hard work on Action Oak, because she's the unsung hero in this webinar as well. So thanks, Annabelle, and thanks everyone for joining us to the bitter end. And it's been fantastic to spend an hour and a quarter with you. Thank you. Bye.